The beginning of the day in Willow Creek is not marked by sound, but by an enduring, almost geological silence. It is a quiet so profound, so deeply rooted in the valley soil and absorbed by the immense canopy of old-growth trees, that it seems less like an absence of noise and more like a pervasive, heavy, physical quality, a constant, unyielding companion to the thin, hesitant light of the morning. This silence possesses a specific, low-frequency pressure, a kind of acoustic vacuum that the ears must physically adjust to. A silence, unlike any found in the frantic haste of the modern world. Our focus centers on Silas Atherton, the town's archivist, an unofficial custodian of its stillness, a man who has perfected the art of non-intervention and profound observation. He resides in a small, square, cedar-shingled house near the bend of the creek, a structure whose age is measured not in years, but in the slow-settling tilt of its porch, a tilt that has progressed by, perhaps, 1/4 of an inch over the last 3 decades. An observation Silas made and documented in his personal ledger. With quiet satisfaction, Silas wakes precisely at 5 o'clock. An awakening not triggered by an alarm's jarring intrusion, but by the subtle, predictable shift in the light. This light, filtering through the ancient, slightly wavy glass of his bedroom window, is not a sudden illumination but a slow, creamy infusion. The glass itself, thick and imperfectly rolled, distorts the early world into soft, indistinct shapes, creating a dreamlike buffer between the sleeping house and the still sleeping world outside. He spends a long, sustained interval, nearly 10 minutes, simply lying in the quiet darkness, allowing his internal rhythms to synchronize with the external stillness. He notes the complex, quiet process of his own body stirring, the minute adjustments of muscles, the slow, rhythmic pulse of his blood against the pillow, the infinitesimal changes in the tension of his eyelids. He begins the crossing of the room, a slow, deliberate movement that minimizes any disturbance to the sleeping house. His bare feet meet the cold, polished oak floorboards. He listens for the slight, dry complaint of the wood beneath his weight, a familiar sound that serves as a small, daily register of the room's ambient temperature and humidity. His trajectory leads him to the kitchen, a space filled with the cool, dry scent of old spices stored in glass jars, and the heavier, slightly metallic odor of stacked, decades-old newspapers used for kindling. The preparation of his morning tea is not a hurried action dictated by need, but a meticulous, 20-minute ritual, personal benchmark against the manic, irrelevant speed of the outside world that Willow Creek so successfully ignores. He measures the water from the stone well into the copper kettle. The copper, heavy and aged, is cool to the touch. He holds the kettle at eye level, ensuring the volume is exact, a fluid volume that corresponds precisely to 2 cups in the porcelain mug. The anticipation of this measurement, this exactitude, is a profound pleasure. The kettle is then set upon the low gas burner. He must open the small, low valve with extreme slowness to prevent a hiss of escaping gas. A single, small, controlled poof of ignition is often the loudest sound in the house for the first hour of the day, an unavoidable punctuation mark in the ongoing stillness. He stands, motionless, back to the light, watching the vapor begin its slow, hesitant descent from the kettle's spout, a long, quiet meditation on the transition of matter from cool liquid to warm, visible steam. He observes the dust motes suspended in the early slant of the soon tiny, ephemeral travelers caught in the profound stillness of the room. He notes their meticulous accumulation on the surface of the air currents, following their slow, inevitable descent to the floor. This slow, unhurried observation forms the soft hook of Silas's life, a life lived in a continuous, reflective pause, where the microscopic details of the domestic world mirror the enduring quietude of the town. He contemplates the concept of time in Willow Creek. It does not rush here. It merely accretes, like the heavy, wet moss clinging tenaciously to the ancient river stones. The town exists in a state of suspended animation, a constant, gentle drift where nothing truly urgent ever occurs, and everything important has already happened long ago and been filed away in the archives. He waits patiently for the kettle to reach its full, gentle singing point, a high-pitched, harmonic vibration that is itself a delicate, quiet pleasure, a signal of readiness. The tea is finally poured. The dark, almost black liquid swirling with the pale, thick milk, creating a momentary, miniature galaxy in the white porcelain mugga pattern of turbulence that dissolves slowly, perfectly, into a uniform beige. Silas carries his mug to his reading chair by the window, moving with the steadiness of a deep-sea diver. The simple act of sitting takes 5 slow minutes, settling his posture, adjusting the fold of the blanket, letting the residual warmth of the mug seep into his palms. He's ready to begin his day's long watch over the sleepy town, measuring the silence, one deep, careful breath at a time. Silas's professional life is governed by a precise, almost geometrical routine. He is the sole curator of the Willow Creek Public Archives, a dusty, quiet room housed in the back of the old municipal library. The journey from his house to the library is a half-mile walk that he executes with an unvarying, controlled pace, transforming his body into a walking metronome marking the true, slow speed of Willow Creek. He has measured the steps required exactly, 872, assuming no deviation for minor obstructions, and aims for a total time of 18 minutes, an internal target that structures his morning perfectly. The path is lined with massive, towering sycamore trees, their massive, dappled trunks providing a shifting mosaic of shade and light. Silas uses this play of light as a continuous, quiet form of abstract art. He watches the intricate interplay of shadow and sun on the cracked asphalt of the old road, observing the fractal geometry of decay. The cracks in the asphalt, formed by winter ice and summer heat, create minute repeating Potnestiny river deltas of black against graythet. He observes and mentally he notes the precise location where the morning shadow of the old general store begins to touch the curb, an observation that changes by mere inches each day, forming a continuous quiet solar calendar far more accurate than any commercially produced planner. This microscopic observation is his way of ensuring the world, and specifically Willow Creek, is still operating according to its ancient, dependable rules of physics and decay. Upon reaching the library, the entry ritual is long and solemn, a quiet, multi-stage process of re-entering history. He retrieves the immense iron key from his pocket, a heavy, cold object that has worn a smooth, distinct depression into the lining of his trousers. He fits the key into the heavy, carved oak doors. The tumblers turn with a dry, gravelly resistance that echoes the passing of decades. Each click and thunk, a small, necessary surrender of time. He pushes the door inward. The heavy oak swings slowly, the old hydraulic closa hissing faintly, a low, mechanical exhalation that takes a full minute to fully silence the door against the jamb. He then walks slowly through the main reading room, which is entirely empty at this hour, absorbing the space's cool, academic air. He observes the massive, dark wooden tables, the precise alignment of the chairs, and the ceiling-high shelves lined with the quiet weight of unread paper. Each book, a compressed, silent volume of human knowledge. The room holds the distinct, comforting scent of aging book glue, low-acid paper, and trapped, filtered light. The archives are sequestered behind a velvet rope and a small, official-looking sign, reading staff only. This velvet rope, a simple, faded crimson cord, serves not just as a boundary, but as the boundary of stillness. Silas approaches it. Slowly, the act of unhooking the rope is a deliberate ritual that requires fine motor control. He lifts the heavy, tarnished brass hook, ensuring the velvet rope does not drag or disturb the arrangement of the nearby historical display case. The velvet rope, once wunocht, is laid carefully across the top of a small, polished wooden cabinet, a silent indicator that the historical heart of the town is now active. The archives room itself is Silas's true sanctuary, a small, windowless space dedicated entirely to preservation and quiet contemplation. He runs his hand over the spines of the town ledgers, the sheer physical weight of the town's administrative history, a reassuring presence. His first task, every morning, is the slow, repetitive dusting of the main reference table. This is not for cleanliness alone, but an act of meditation, a physical connection to the materials he has sworn to protect. A uses a fine wide horsehead brush, the bristles soft yet firm, his strokes slow, deliberate, and entirely silent, following the long grain of the wood. He moves with a quiet grace among the towering stacks of documents, a gentle guardian in a forest of paper and ink, ensuring that the stillness of the room is maintained and that the dust of yesterday is gently removed before the accumulation of today can begin. The central architectural and spiritual feature of Willow Creek is the town hall clock, a massive, copper-plated timepiece mounted high on the spire of the oldest building. It is visible from almost every point in the valley, its gleaming surface catching the sunlight. But its purpose is less to tell the precise time and more to establish the town's particular sense of pace. Silas visits the clock tower every Tuesday morning, and today is Tuesday, the day of reckoning for the temporal heart of Willow Creek. The ascent is slow and arduous, involving a climb up 3 flights of narrow, rickety wooden stairs. He ascends one step at a time, testing the strength of the old timber before committing his weight, his pace dictated by the age of the structure itself. This is followed by an agonizingly slow spiral ladder, its rungs cold and worn smooth by the repeated passage of keepers over more than a century. The internal space of the tower is cool and intensely dry, smelling sharply of high-viscosity machine oil, old timber, and the dry, alkaline residue of pigeon guano. The main chamber holds the immense, complex mechanism, a vast, beautiful entanglement of polished brass gears, heavy iron weights, and long, swinging pendulums. This is the slow unfurling of the clock. The mechanism is a physical representation of the absolute commitment to precision and slowness. Silas does not simply check the time against his wrist. He checks the rhythm against the solar noon and his own internal cadence. He observes the almost imperceptible movements of the mainspring, the slow descent of the counterweights, and the quiet, steady, oscillating swing of the pendulum. He sits on a small wooden stool, taking care not to scrape it against the uneven floorboards. He observes the mechanism for a sustained, deep 10 minutes, allowing his senses to be entirely absorbed by the repetitive physics. He ensures the tempo of the swing is perfectly symmetrical, its cadence a reflection of the town's steady, unchanging heart, its movement a visual definition of measured, non-rushed time. He examines the brass gears, noting the microscopic film of oil on each tooth, watching how the light catches the curved metal surfaces as they turn. He performs the required maintenance, a single drop of high-viscosity oil applied precisely to the main escapement. The oil is dispensed from a specialized brass oiler, the spout long and thin. This small, crucial task is executed with a jeweler's precision, taking several minutes of focused effort. He then cleans the glass face of the 4 dials from the inside, using a chamois cloth and a diluted solution of purified water and alcohol. His hand moves in slow, circular motions that clear the accumulated grime and leave the white face shining faintly. This act of cleaning the face is an act of purifying the town's visible measure of time, ensuring clarity. The final element is the striking mechanism. The clock is set to strike only at noon, releasing a single, deep, resonant bell tone that vibrates through the entire valley. Silas checks the heavy clapper, ensuring it hangs perfectly vertical, centered precisely above the bronze bell. He reflects on the immense power contained within the coiled metal and the heavy weights, a power only released for a single, defining, authoritative moment each day. He leaves the tower slowly, his body feeling the heavy, rhythmic vibration of the immense machine, carrying the perfect, slow rhythm of the pendulum back into the heart of his day, his body now synchronized with the town's temporal core. Silas often uses the afternoon lull to explore the town's perimeter, a process he calls mapping the stillness. Today, he traces the oldest road, an unmarked, deeply rutted lane that leads not to the main highway, but to the earliest settlement site. The path of forgotten stones. The air here is noticeably cooler, untouched by the direct sun, smelling deeply of wet loam, decaying leaves, and the sharp, mineral scent of exposed bedrock. The path eventually leads him to the Willow Creek Cemetery, a vast, unkempt field where headstones tilt at impossible angles, testament to the slow, irresistible power of frost heave and gravity. Moss and lichen slowly consume the names carved into the granite. He walks slowly among the plots, reading the epitaphs not out of morbid curiosity, but to connect the names in the archives to the physical reality of the earth. He seeks out the oldest, most illegible stones, those nearly swallowed by the earth, often brushing the heavy, velvet moss away with a slow, careful hand to decipher the eroded script beneath. He reads the dates, the names, and the brief, austere descriptions of lives lived long ago. A patient mother died in the service of God. A loyal husband. He spends a long, quiet interval at the tombstone of Ezekiel Finch, the town's first mayor and the builder of the town hall clock. The stone is a simple granite slab, inscribed with only a name and the date, 1810 to 1888. Silas sits nearby on a low wall, contemplating the 80-year span of that life and the silent, enduring quality of Finch's stone legacy. He considers how every town has a few individuals whose ambition and focused energy become so concentrated that they survive their own demise, manifesting as permanent structures, boundaries, or rules. Finch's ambition lives in the steady, rhythmic swing of the pendulum that still marks the town's time. Silas then notices an unusual anomaly in the furthest corner of the cemetery, near the original, dry-stacked stone boundary wall. A small, rough-hewn stone placed flat on the ground, entirely blank, with no name, date, or epitaph. It is simply a patch of the natural slate, deliberately placed and perfectly level. He carefully brushes the dirt from its edges, revealing that it is far older and denser than the surrounding grave markers. He suspects it is a survey marker, or perhaps a relic from a non-Christian burial tradition, a single, silent placeholder for a forgotten, unrecorded person, perhaps one of the transient river people whose history was excluded from the town ledger. The complete silence of the stone is a profound contrast to the verbose praise and history surrounding it. He measures the small, rectangular stone with his hand, noting its precise dimensions in his mental inventory of the town's permanent features. It is a quiet moment of profound, unanswerable mystery, a physical gap in the historical record that Silas accepts with calm. He takes a small, folded piece of archival paper and a soft pencil, tracing the outline of the stone onto the paper, recording its texture and its coordinates relative to the nearest marked grave. Back in the heart of the town square, the dominant feature is not the clock, but the massive, ancient sycamore tree. It stands at the geographical center of Willow Creek, a colossal living anchor whose branches spread further than any building, casting the largest single patch of continuous shade. It is a biological timekeeper, a silent witness to every generation. And today, Silas commits a long, slow period to its observation, an act he calls listening to the whisper of the sycamore. He approaches the tree not with a glance, but with the reverence due to an ancient monument. He runs his hand over the bark, feeling the texture, the smooth, pale patches of inner growth, blending with the rugged, dark sections of outer bark, a complex, constantly evolving map of its massive growth and quiet survival. He positions himself on a worn, dark wooden bench beneath, its broadest bough taking a position that allows him to observe the complex architecture of its branches, the slow, almost imperceptible sway of the canopy in the almost non-existent breeze. The shade beneath the sycamore is the coolest, deepest, most consistent shade in the entire town. Here, all sounds are diffused, softened, and absorbed by the immense volume of the leaves and the sheer physical mass of the trunk. Silas focuses on the subtle, quiet processes of the tree itself. The slow, continuous minute shedding of its bark, which falls in small, brittle flakes. The slight, almost inaudible rustle of its leaves high above as they exchange gases with the humid air. The steady, gravitational pull of its massive weight on the earth, compacting the soil around its base. He notes the way the light filters down in tiny, fragmented, coin-sized shapes, moving slowly across the ground as the sun passes overhead, creating ephemeral, silent patterns on the dusty earth. He reflects on the stories the tree must hold. Before the town, the roads, or the clock, this tree stood here. Every decision, every sorrow, every quiet joy that occurred in the square happened beneath this canopy. He closes his eyes for an extended period, focusing entirely on the feeling of the heavy, protective shade, imagining the deep, slow growth of its root system, complex, silent network beneath the cobblestones, and the asphalt reaching down into the underground streams of the creek. He stays for a full hour and 20 minutes, moving only his eyes and his breathing, absorbing the profound stillness. This deep, unhurried contemplation is his act of communion with the town's oldest, most reliable spirit, a silent conversation across centuries. The sycamore provides the stillness, Silas provides the meticulous, unwavering attention, cataloging the small, quiet dramas of the natural world. Returning to the archives, Silas engages with a recurring, minor puzzle, one that has occupied his peripheral attention for years and represents a deliberate fracture in the historical record. The unfinished tapestry. This is his term for the town's earliest administrative record, the heavy, official 1820 ledger of founding families. It is not a historical mystery of crime or scandal, but a purely archival, methodical challenge to the concept of total documentation. The ledger is bound in heavy, brittle calfskin, and written in a meticulously tight script using a heavy, dark iron gall ink. The book is complete and intact, but Silas has long noticed a disturbing, systematic gap in the record. Approximately 10 consecutive pages, running from page 72 to page 81, contain no entries for the family names, births, or land claims that should have been recorded during that precise period. The pages are physically present, the paper intact, but they are absolutely blank, not aged blank, but pristine, untouched. Their surface fiber structure still smooth and they were prepared for ink, ruled with light pencil lines, but the ink never came. Silas retrieves a ledger from its acid-free storage box. The act of turning the pages is slow and careful, a deliberate process to avoid microfractures in the ancient paper. He stops at the blank section, running his finger across the unmarked surface. The paper feels lighter, less loaded with the physical and moral weight of history than the surrounding entries. He considers the possibilities, a sudden, severe illness that interrupted the work, a forgotten period of mass migration, or perhaps a deliberate political erasure of a contingent of early residents. He cross-references this date range with every parallel document available: the church birth register, the tax scrolls, and the early land survey maps. In every parallel document, the period between 1820 and 1822 shows a distinct, unexplained dip in activity, a sudden vacuum of recorded life. No obvious crisis is logged in the weather reports or the sparse official correspondence. The town simply went quiet. Its administrative recording systems paused, or perhaps averted. Silas spends the afternoon charting the known families adjacent to the blank pages. He sketches complex family trees, attempting to infer which families would have occupied that missing administrative slot. He concludes that the missing entries represent the records of the river people, a small group of itinerant loggers and trappers who were known to camp along Willow Creek but never fully integrated into the town structure, refusing to pay the small tax or claim formal land deeds. The blank pages are not an accidental omission, but a subtle historical protest. The official town record, guided by the rigidity of its founders, refused to acknowledge the existence of those who lived outside its established legal and financial structure. The blank pages are the town's most eloquent commentary on the definition of belonging, a silence louder than any text. Silas ponders whether he should, as the current archivist, break the silence and fill those pages with his historical findings, or honor the original protest of the pen by leaving them blank, preserving the historical argument. In Willow Creek, the period between 1 and 3 o'clock is not merely the afternoon. It is the midday silence and shadow. This is the hour when the stillness of the morning reaches its apex, becoming almost painful in its intensity. The accumulated heat settles. The air stops moving, and the entire valley seems to hold its collective breath. Silas chooses this time for his solitary, unhurried lunch, eaten at the high window of the archives, overlooking the near motionless square. The meal is simple and consistent. Cold roast beef and a slice of dense, dry, homemade rye bread, consumed slowly, deliberately, savoring the texture and the quiet, complex taste of the salt, grains, and spices. The consumption of the meal is itself a long, internal event. He chews slowly, reflecting on the mechanics of ingestion, the quiet, repetitive rhythm of jaw and muscle, the small, controlled acts of swallowing. He drinks only well water, cool and faintly mineralized, held in an opaque glass tumbler. The silence is so profound that he can hear the subtle, dry creak of the ancient window frame responding to the infinitesimal expansion of the midday heat, and the faint, dry scritch of a single fly buzzing weakly against the glass in the sun's direct light. His attention is drawn to the quality of the light itself. It is at its brightest, but also its least descriptive. The high, vertical angle of the sun eliminates almost all distinguishing shadows, flattening the physical landscape into large, undifferentiated masses of color. The houses become blocks of pale paint. The trees become heavy, green clouds. The town loses its texture and becomes abstract. This loss of shadow, the essence of three-dimensional definition, contributes significantly to the feeling of suspended animation. Silas closes his eyes for an extended period of full 12 minutes. Focusing entirely on his internal world, he counts his heartbeats, following their steady rhythm, and regulates his breathing, slowing the intake and output of air to match the slow, almost imperceptible rhythm of the town clock's pendulum. This extended internal pause is necessary for his work. The archives demand total presence, a meditative state where the urgent demands of the modern world cannot penetrate. He believes the records speak loudest when the observer is entirely still, when the observer's own internal noise is dampened completely. The silence is a tool, a necessary vacuum for historical signals. He finds that if he sits still enough, long enough, he can almost feel the presence of the forgotten loggers from the blank pages, their quiet, transient life echoing in the unrecorded space. The true, deep work of the afternoon begins with a meticulous examination of the town archives themselves, and the dominant sensory experience is the scent of old paper. It is a dry, slightly sweet, acidic aroma, a quiet cocktail of lignin and cellulose decomposition that, for Silas, is the perfume of enduring time. He spends hours in meticulous, slow inventory. Today's focus is a box labeled simply Deeds and Discrepancies, 1845 to 1855. He uses cotton gloves and handles each document with extreme caution, moving the papers so slowly that the motion is almost imperceptible, a process that minimizes the stress on the brittle paper fibers. Each paper is a piece of parchment, fragile and brittle, its edges yellowed with age, its texture like dry, delicate skin. The ink is usually an iron gall formulation, which has bled slightly into the fibers over time, darkening the words, but also slightly corroding the paper itself. A quiet, slow chemical warfare on the very medium of history. He is searching for an explanation for the sudden, brief surge of land sales recorded in 1849, a phenomena that contradicts the town's generally stagnant growth rate. He examines dozens of deeds, noting the ornate, looping signatures of the justices of the peace and the crude, often block-littered marks of the farmers and early settlers. The sheer detail in the documentation is immense. Every tree boundary, every creek turn, every measurement down to the fraction of a rod. The words themselves are heavy, official, and utterly binding. He finds a pattern. Almost all the land sold in 1849 was located not in the fertile valley, but on the high, rocky ridges surrounding Willow Creek. This land was undesirable for farming and difficult to access. He finally discovers a marginal note on a deed for a plot sold to an individual named Jeremiah Vane. The note is written in a different hand, a small, neat script, and simply reads, "Mineral rights specifically excluded. Land suitable only for observation." Silas leans closer, examining the ink. It is lighter than the deed ink, suggesting a later, post-sale edition. He realizes that the surge in land sales was not for settlement, but for speculation. A brief, quiet rush for a forgotten mineral, likely iron or slate, that never materialized. The town, in its collective wisdom, sold off its least valuable property to outsiders, hoping to exploit an imaginary resource, then calmly returned to its sleep once the speculators left. This event, now dubbed the theory of Vane by Silas, proves that the town's enduring quietude is an active defense mechanism against the chaos of external ambition. The scent of the old paper, carrying the subtle residue of this past ambition, tells the story of transient greed quickly repelled by the town's enduring quietude. The late afternoon in Willow Creek is defined by a slow, agonizingly beautiful descent of light phenomena. Silas calls the perpetual sunset because the town is situated deep in the valley, surrounded by the high, rolling ridges. The sun disappears behind the western ridge hours before the technical sunset, stretching the transition into a long, quiet, atmospheric event. This period, lasting nearly 2 hours, is marked by a deep transformation of color. Silas leaves the archives and makes his way back to his house, timing his walk precisely to coincide with this light change. He watches as the direct sunlight recedes up the slope of the eastern ridge, leaving the valley floor first in shadow. Then, in a long, sustained state of crepuscular glow, the light that remains is soft, diffused, and intensely golden, filtering through the immense, high airspace, lending every surface the old wood, the faded paint, the wet soil-rich, profound color that seems to belong to a historical memory. This extended period of subtle light creates a feeling of temporal ambiguity, as if the day refuses to end and night hesitates to begin. He pauses on the small wooden bridge over Willow Creek. The water, which is fast-moving and clear, now reflects the intense golden and mauve hues of the upper sky. The light hits the surface of the creek, and the slow, rhythmic ripples on the water transform the colors into a mesmerizing, kinetic tapestry, a silent, constantly dissolving work of art. Silas stands motionless, observing the movement of the light for a sustained 20 minutes, letting the slow visual drama wash over him. He examines the surface of the creek, watching the delicate patterns of water flow around the submerged river stones, noting the quiet, continuous erosion that defines the valley's true, immense time. He notes the slow, sequential turning on of the town's artificial light sources. The street lamps, old glass globes with a weak, yellowish glow, are the first to activate, casting isolated pools of uncertain light that look thin and artificial against the robust, natural glow of the sky. Then, the isolated windows of the houses begin to light up, one by one, signaling the quiet, separate routines of the town's scattered residents. This progression from natural, overwhelming light to small, contained pockets of human-generated light is a quiet metaphor for life in Willow Creek, a vast, beautiful stillness, dotted by small, self-contained lives, maintaining their own flickering order. The final traces of light cling stubbornly to the highest point of the town clock spire, making the copper weather vane glow like a distant signal fire before it submits to the encroaching shadows. The period just before full darkness is dedicated to the quiet observation of his neighbors, a ritual known to Silas as watching for the single lamp in the window. He sits by his own window, the room unlit, observing the isolated pools of light cast by the houses across the creek. He is not spying. He is simply confirming the continued, safe existence and adherence to quiet routine of the town's components. He focuses on the house belonging to the elderly Mrs. Alcott, who lives alone 200 yards away. Her house is the farthest visible structure, and her routine is the most critical for Silas's inventory, as it is the most erratic. Some nights, her kitchen light goes on at precisely 6:45 p.m. Other nights, only a faint, weak light in the rear bedroom appears at 8 p.m. Tonight, he watches as her front parlor lamp, a tall, antique fixture with a slightly uneven shade, flickers on. The light it casts is a warm, orange glow, contained entirely within the geometry of her front window, a small, domestic stage. Silas contemplates the immense weight of the contained lives within those small, distant pools of light. Mrs. Alcott's existence, largely known to him through census records and archived correspondence regarding property disputes, is entirely so. He reflects on the fact that the entire span of a person's life, their loves, sorrows, small victories, and long defeats can be reduced to a single, flickering patch of lamplight visible through a pane of glass from a distance. The consistency of these small, individual human routines forms the unbreakable rhythm of the town, far more than the clock itself. He recalls the old town legend of the whispering wires, The belief that if you listened closely to the old, unused telephone lines strung across the valley, you could hear the collective silence of the town passing through them. The sound of all the unsaid conversations and unspoken thoughts compressed into a low, pervasive hum. Silas doesn't believe in the literal wires, but he believes in the principle that all the concentrated, quiet energy of the town's isolated lives flows through the shared space, creating the unique, deep stillness that defines Willow Creek. The observation is slow, sustained, and entirely silent, an inventory of the human heart in its simplest, most domestic form. As the night deepens, Silas moves into his final, philosophical reflection, the development of his theory of stillness. He sits in his study, surrounded by the physical evidence of time. The archives. He lights a single, low-wattage desk lamp, illuminating only the small patch of the table where he writes in his own personal journal, a deep blue ledger, distinct from the official black ones. He posits that Willow Creek is not merely quiet, but that it has actively chosen stillness as its fundamental state of being, a philosophical stance against the modern world. All towns are born from activity, but Willow Creek, he concludes, found its identity by deliberately withdrawing from the chaos of industrialization, war, and rapid change. It achieved this by perfecting its internal rhythms, the slow tick of the clock, the long duration of the sunset, the predictable, deep silence of the afternoon. These are not accidental. They are cultural technologies designed for preservation. He writes slowly, his pen moving with the familiar, rhythmic friction across the heavy paper. He theorizes that the blank pages in the 1820 ledger, the mysterious slate marker in the cemetery, and even the theory of vein are all manifestations of this will to stillness. They are the town's way of marking the boundaries of its chosen existence, actively erasing anything that represented undue haste, transience, or disruption. His conclusion is that true preservation is not about locking documents in a vault. It is about adopting the pace of the past, by moving slowly, by observing in microscopic detail, by committing to routine. He is not merely protecting the archives. He is actively recreating the psychological environment in which those archives were created. He becomes a living bridge, allowing the rhythm of 1882 bleed into 2020. The longevity of the town is not due to its architecture or geography, but to its collective, sustained, unconscious commitment to boredom, a deep, necessary boredom that repels the speed of the modern world. This final, quiet act of writing is the deepest manifestation of the town's philosophy. The night reaches its deepest, coldest point, the hour closest to 5 in the morning. Silas closes his journal, the low thud of the cover a definitive sound marking the end of his intellectual labors. He stands and walks slowly to the front door, performing his final ritual of the day, ensuring the entire house is secured against the dark. He checks the lock, testing the heavy bolt with a final, firm pressure of his palm. He walks back to his bedroom, crossing the worn, checkered rug. The air is entirely still, holding the temperature of the cold, dense valley air. He stands for a prolonged period at the window, observing the town under the deep, velvet weight of the unmoving night sky. The streetlights are now isolated, small pools of weak yellow light, separated by vast stretches of shadow. The light from Mrs. Alcott's window has long since vanished, replaced by the complete, black silence of her distant house. Silas finally retires, sinking slowly into the immense comfort of his bed. The weight of the blankets, a physical anchor in the stillness. He lies awake for a sustained period, his mind not racing but gently tracing the day's slow path. The texture of the rye bread, the scent of the old paper, the infinitesimal movement of the town clock pendulum, the rhythmic sway of the sycamore's highest branches. He focuses on his own breathing, matching his intake and output to the slow, steady rhythm he observed in the clock tower. He closes his eyes. He has completed his watch. The silence is now complete, profound, and utterly predictable. The rhythm of Willow Creek has been confirmed, charted, and preserved for another night. He knows that in a few hours, the light will begin its slow, hesitant return. The thin vapor will rise from the kettle, and he will begin the cycle anew. The town sleeps, not restlessly, but with the quiet, assured slumber of a being whose rhythm is immutable, whose destiny is stillness. and whose story is measured in slow, deep, necessary time. The long, rhythmic night is complete, waiting for the light.